In this video, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at Jest itself. This is going to be a crash course on Jest, so we're going to learn how to use Jest and React testing library to be able to write unit tests for our components in our app. The app that we're going to be building today is a movie review app with Next.js 15. So first of all, what we will be doing is creating that app, and then we will apply the unit tests. So we're going to look at all of the different unit tests that we can look at possible. We're going to be adding all of this in our project. So you can see here we've got fast and safe code coverage, easy mocking, and exceptions. You can see and read more on this website over here. The same with React testing library as well. There also are docs available on Jest on how to get started. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to apply it specifically for React and Next.js itself. So then you'll have the confidence to build and create your own unit tests in your code base or at your work. So what we're going to be doing first is we're going to create our movie review app. So again, let's go ahead and get started with the build. Right, so the first thing we want to do is we want to create our Next.js app. So in our terminal, let's just zoom in a little bit. And in here, what we want to do is we want to create our Next.js app. So you would use npx create next app, then the movie review app. So then we'll follow the steps that Next.js provides us. Again, we want to proceed, so press Y. Would you like to use TypeScript? Yes, and let's just follow all of the default methods in here. So everything is app route and so on, and then import alias no. And if you're unfamiliar with Next.js, we're using Next.js 15, and I have recently done a crash course on Next.js 15 as well that you can look at on how all of the features work and so on. You can see here now everything's installed. So all we need to do now is cd into our movies app. So it's movie review app. And then all we do now is code space dot. Now this is going to open up our VS Code for us. So let me just expand this. And now let's close everything down and open up a terminal. And if you want to learn about the folder structure and so on, what you can look at the Next.js 15 crash course that I created also. So now what we want to do is we want to, first of all, check that we have everything installed in our package JSON over here. You can see everything is fine. We have React and React DOM with Next as well. So everything with the server components is available to us. And then we also have dev dependencies and we are using Tailwind CSS. So that is everything for us. In our page, we have everything in here, but let's just go ahead and close this down and we will actually keep this div open. Everything in the main tag, actually, let's just delete. So now let's do a H1 in here saying movie review app. And then what we can do is just save this, but I don't want to focus on how we create it, but it is important as well to understand how we create components. And then from there, how we create the unit tests related to that component. So that's the first thing we want to do. So let's go ahead and we have a MovieCard component that we need to create. So let's create our folder of components within app. So in here, let's create a folder, so components. And in this folder, what we're going to be doing is create a MovieCard.tsx like so. Or what you can actually do is do MovieCard like so. And then inside here, we have our files. So in our scenario, if we have unit test types, other files such as styles and so on, is contained within the MovieCard. So this is where your folder structure comes into play. So what we can do now is name this as index.tsx like so. So if we expand it, we have components, MovieCard, index.tsx. And then what we would do is we would have our test file, which is index.test.tsx as well. So that's the first thing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just bring in my MovieCard component in here. And then let me save that. We have our interface. Again, you can separate this out with our solid principles into a single responsibility and your interface segregation. So essentially the MovieCard prop should be in the relevant types file. So you can do that, but I'm just going to leave that for now. And then we have our MovieCard component itself. Simply put, it's a div. It has an image using next image, a H2 with the title of the movie, and then the rating as well out of 5. So that's as simple as it gets. We will create a unit test for this later. That's our first component out the way. Then we want to create the movies on the home page. So what I'm going to do in our page.tsx over here, I'm just simply going to create an array at the top. And then what we want to do is we want to map these on our page. So our home page, for example, this is a page of home, and then in here we want to import our movie card that we just created. Again, when we're mapping over something, to add the optional chain just for best practices. And then we should have 3 movies in here with the 3 ratings. So now let me save this. And now let me just quickly do npm run dev. So npm run dev. And again, make sure you're on the right node version. And I'm just going to close Copilot for now. Everything's starting in here and it's ready. So let me just open this up. And what we will do is we will bring this in. Now you can see we have our movie card component over here. The images aren't loading, and I'm guessing the images need to be valid. So again, we don't have the right images in here. What we can do is add them in. So let's go ahead and add them in, and we will be right back. Right, so now that I've created our movies over here and we've done our images, we've updated the next config.js as well. What I want to do next is I want to add a reviewing feature. So what we need to do for that is create a review form component. So let's go ahead and add that one in as well. So in components, let's create a new folder in here, and this one's called review form. And in review form, we're going to have an index.tsx file as well. Let me go into this one. And in here, let's just paste in our code. Let me just bring this terminal down and just zoom out a little bit so we can see the whole component. This is just a client component, so we want to use the use state. Again, you can look at the Next.js crash course on how everything works. And then what we have is a text area with a button that submits the review that we have. So that is everything complete in our review form. Let me just save that. And then what we want to do now is add this component in our individual movies page, which we haven't created. So let's go ahead and create that. So let's close the components folder in here. And then what we want in our app folder is a new folder in here called movies. So this is the routing that will happen. And then in here, we want to do movie slash and then the slug or the ID. So it's going to be the ID in our scenario here, like so. And let me just, in movies, we have ID of whatever it is. And then in ID, we want to do index.tsx. Or actually, it's a page, so it will be page.tsx. Now what we want to do is we want to paste this in, what we have in here, and then we're importing our review form. So let me just paste that in as well. And then now let's save everything. And you can see here, I've got the movie data across here. What we can do is we can pass in using params and so on. And if you want to know how that works, then again, look in the Next.js 15 crash course. But we're just going to create these separate pages for now. And then in here, what we will do is create our unit test. So that is our movie details page. All we need to do now is update the movie card. So in movie card, in here, we now want to add in our linking. So let me just quickly paste in our component. Let's quickly just wrap this with a link tag so we can simply use next link. And then let's wrap this. And then we import in our next link tag. Again, this movie should be something like an ID, but we're not using the param, so we can use the title as part of the path. Again, this is not focused on how we would do the actual movie itself, but what we want to do is focus on the testing. So that's the next part. Now what we want to do is in our page.tsx, we want a top movie section. So in our page.tsx on the home page, so let's go into the home page, and where we have our movie reviews, that's fine. What we can do is we can render all of the movies like so, or what we want to do is we want to do the top movies. So now we need to create this function. So this will basically filter out all of our top movies that we have greater than a certain rating. So let's go ahead in our movies array. You can see here, this is 4.8, 4.6, and 4.9. So what I want to do is do our top movies. So let's add in our function of get top movies like so. Again, we can have the any type and so on, but instead what we can do is create a type for this. So let's do our type at the top. Type of movie is equal to title, rating, and image URL like so. And then we can basically assign this movie as a array like that. And then this will now be our get top movies, takes in our movies, i.e. the array of movies. So let's get again do this and again add in what we can do for our filtering comment in here. Everything is in one file, but this again should be separated. So now we have a function in here. What we want to do is we want to filter out based on whether the movie is greater than 4.8. So let's just do that for now. And then this is our UI complete. So what we want to do is now create the unit test. So let's first of all finish what we have in here. So let's refresh, and we have two movies. You can click through to one. You go to the individual movie page, so you can see the title is added as part of the path. So now here it says we need to use a client component. So where are we using this? It's in the page. At the top, what we can do here is do a use client, and let's save that. And now you can see our review is coming through. We can write our review and then submit it. So when we type something in, so excellent, for example, when we submit, that should add it in here. But when we refresh, this won't persist because we don't have a database, we don't have an actual working API and so on. So then when we go back and do the same with Inception, it adds in the same reviews in here. So what we want to do now, we've created our app. We want to now install Jest and then make sure everything is set up for Jest. So let's get ahead and start with our Jest Crash Course. Right, so what we want to do is we want to install Jest to add our unit tests in. So let's go into our docs at the top, and you can simply see here it says get started. And this is a simple example of how you would want to get started. But for us in Next.js 15, so what we want to do is we want to install a few packages. So we can do npm i, and then we want, first of all, Jest. We also want testing library React, testing library Jest DOM, and Jest environment Jest DOM, like that. And let's save. So this will install everything for us, and then what will happen is we will add that into our package.json. So you got these errors in here. So in this scenario, what I would recommend you do is take a look at the security vulnerabilities video on how to fix these issues here and add in overrides. For now, let's just check our package.json, and in dependencies now we have our testing library and so on with Jest as well. So that is all fine. What we want to do is, first of all, let's just clear everything out in our terminal, and then we have all our packages installed. There's two things we need to do now, which is at the package JSON level, we want to create a new file called jestconfig.js, like so. And then in here, we've got a couple of things that we need to add. So let me just paste them in, which essentially is Next.js, which is required Next.js for our Next.js. Then we want to create the Jest config, and this is the directory. If you want to see what goes in Next.js, you can simply click through and then go through what it is or look at the documentation. Then we have our custom Jest config. So this is the test environment we're using, which is Jest environment JS DOM, which is what we just installed. And then here we want to do setup files after env, and then this is root directory of jest setup.js. So what we want to do again, we want to create this file as well, and then this is the jest config that basically wraps everything in our custom jest config, like so. And again, if you want it for React and so on, then you just take a look at the documentation on how they would set that up in the React applications as well. So in here now at this level again, let's create a new file called jest setup.js. Press enter, and this is just a simple one, which is basically when we have our unit test, we want to import our testing library Jest DOM, like so. Instead of importing it in our files everywhere, we can just add it in here, so it happens and imports testing library in for us as well. So React testing library is just adding extra matches for us in our unit test. So again, you can look at the documentation for this. So let's go ahead and check that out. And in here, you can see it says build on top of DOM testing library by adding APIs for working with React components. So that's things like to be in the document and so on. But you can see there's a whole list over here of all of the ways you can use React testing library. It's not just for React, it's for Vue, Angular, and so on. So that is essentially what that is. So now we have installed all our Jest and React testing library packages and configured everything correctly. Now what we want to do next is look at our first unit test. So we will create a unit test for our MovieCard component. Right, so now that everything is installed, what we want to do is create unit tests for our React apps or Next.js apps. And in here, you can see in Jest docs over here, you can see our framework guides. And then this is where we can test our React applications. Now, you can see on the right here, you can do it with create React app, set up without create React app. We have snapshot testing, DOM testing, and so on. We will be covering this in this crash course, so don't worry about that. But if we scroll down, you can see there's many examples of how you would kind of use our testing and unit tests that we have. So you can see all of these examples, but this is quite complicated. So what I want to do is break that down, and let's just do it for our MovieCard component. So essentially, the way unit tests work is we need to create a specific file for them. So in this scenario here, this is a React component that you can see here is highlighted with the React symbol itself. But what we want to do is anything that contains test dot and then TS or TSX or whatever it may be, that is known as the unit test file. So for our index, we want to do index.test.tsx like so, because again, this is testing for JSX elements as well. So in here, we will have a couple of tests testing that it contains an image, it has the rating and so on. So now we have this file. If we hover over it, you can see this is a red compared to the kind of normal React logo over here. So that just suggests that this is a test file. So now let's go ahead and create our first unit test. So generally, when we have a block and we want to test something, we would wrap it in something called describe. And this comes from Jest itself. So let's just do describe like so. And it's not coming from node test. So let me just delete that. And this is essentially like a callback function. So in here, we would have our callback like so. And this is just a simple example of the describe itself. So you can see here, cannot find name describe. Do you need to install type definitions for a test runner? So we can do that. So let's go ahead and install the Jest types. So if you missed installing anything, then what you can do is just basically the IntelliSense gives you the missing information of what you need to install. So now we can do Command Shift and P, and then let's restart our TypeScript server and now save. Now you can see it's showing an error saying expected 2 arguments but got 1. So now what we want to do is this first argument is going to be the name of whatever the component we're testing in this example. So this is how it would work. So now let me save that. And what we're testing for here is the MovieCard component, or you can just say MovieCard like that. So first of all, we have our describe block in here. I'm just going to bring this down. First argument is the name of the component that you're going to be testing. And then we have a callback that has a few different it tests, which this can be named as it or test itself. And then this will be testing for a specific thing to happen, or a specific assertion or specific value to be in the test itself. So again, you can have more than one it block within the describe like this. So let me save that, and you can see here it says it should render correctly, and then you have your expectation in here. What you would normally do is render your component in this example and then have your expectation in as well after the component has been rendered. And then again, same thing with this one, it should display movie titles. So what we'll do here instead is delete this. Let's create our first test, which will be should, or we can do given, when, then, and so on. But I just want to keep it simple for now. So this unit test will be it renders the movie title and rating. So that's what the test is going to be. Now, how we would achieve this is in our index.tsx file. You can see here this MovieCard component takes in 3 props in here. So what we want to do is we want to pass in the relevant props and then make sure it works. So if we look at the example of the MovieCard being rendered on the home page, in here it says MovieCard, and then it takes in the movie, so all the values of the movie. So if you hover over it, it's the type of movie. So in our scenario, it will be the type of movie, which takes in a title, rating, and image URL. So essentially what we want to do in our unit test is we want to render out the movie component. So you can see here, Copilot is suggesting what we can do, which is exactly what I wanted to do. There's a few differences that we need to make. So first of all, what we want to do is you can do the extraction of get by text in here like so, where we destructure what we need from the component that we render. But I don't want to do this, but this is a way you can extract get by text and so on. Let's just delete that for now. Now we want to render the movie card. So first of all, this keyword comes from testing library React. So that's the first thing, which is what we need, which is render a certain component or whatever it may be. This scenario here takes in the title as inception, it takes in the rating, and also the image URL. So we need to also import in our component, and generally because it's in the same file, we can just do movie card from dot like so, because the index file is what we need to import it from. Then we've rendered our component. Now we have our expectations in here. So we had our get by text before that we was kind of destructuring from our render, but what we have is something. So let me just copy this out for now, or comment this out for now. And in here we have something called screen. Now, what I want to do is I want to see what gets rendered when I pass in these props into this movie card component. So what we can do is do screen.debug like so, and then we need to import screen from testing library React as well like so. So now if I save this, what I want to do is I want to test this file. So what I can do now is do npm test like that. But what we need to do before we do that is we need to make sure that this script is in our package.json. So let's go ahead in our package.json. In here, we have certain commands. So you can see here, dev build start lint. We want to add another command, which is basically test like that. And what we can do is we can do watch all, detect open handles, and force exit as well. So let's just save that. Now, if I do npm test again, you can see the command is now running and it's saying something has happened. So let's just go into here. Now you can see it says cannot find module testing library jest extend expect. And actually what we need to do is in our jest setup over here, we want to just do this, which is testing library / jestom. So now if I do npm test, you can see our command is running and you can see our first test has passed. So now you can see we have a total of one test suite, one test in here. We have 0 snapshots. We will look at them later on. And then this is the time it takes. And if we scroll down, you can see here, because we had the watch command in our package, in our test script, what happens is we can press F or P, T, Q, and so on. So you can basically rerun only failed tests. You can run the test related to the change files and so on if you just read this bit here. But what I want to do is in my test, so let's go back into our movie card test file. You can see I did this, which is screen.debug. So basically this is like a console log. It logs out the entire component that we have rendered. So let's scroll up, and now you can see this has rendered out our movie card component based on what props we passed in. So you can see here, this image has an alt title, alt name of Inception. Again, the title is rendered as Inception in the H2. So if you look in our index.tsx over here, the title is a H2 again. You can see the same class name applies here. Again, the rating is also 4.8 and that applies as well. So that is essentially how it works. And then what you would do is you would add your expectations in. So expect and so on. So let's do that next. But what I want to do first of all is I want to show you that when we change this, so let's change this rating to like 4.2 and then save. This will rerun everything. It does the screen.debug, but now you can see it says 4.2 in here. So let's just change it back to 4.8. And now I want to comment out the screen.debug because this is for debugging purposes if you don't know actually what is getting rendered on the page. So let me just uncomment these out. We know that it's rendering Inception, it's on the page as the H2 over here. and we also want to check that the rating is 4.8. So it's saying here that it cannot get by text. So what we should do is with what we did with screen.debug, screen has a few relevant matches that we can kind of see here. So if you hover over it, it says the matcher and then the options as well. So again, same with this one. Again, it's saying inception and the rating in here. So that's the first part done. It's passing, but what's happening here is saying property to be in the document does not exist on type just matches element because this is coming from React testing library. So how do we fix this? You can see here that the test is passing. That's fine. Everything's working correctly. But what we want to do is we want to fix this TypeScript error in here. So what we need to do is add our Jest setup file because we're importing testing library in here into our TS config. So in TS config, you can see this include section in here. What I want to do is include in the Jest config, so jest.setup.js, actually this one. And then let me just check that everything is working now. You can see it's not working because I've not saved it. Let me save all, and then let me do Command Shift P, restart the TypeScript server, and now you can see that error has gone. So now that we've created our unit test, now what we want to do next is do the same for our movie details. Right, so now we've created our first component, which is the movie card. I'm going to show you another method. So we have this index.test.tsx in here, but what we can do now is outside of our app folder in here, we want to create the movies page.tsx test as well. So we can do that in another fashion, which is essentially at the root route, we can create a new folder. This is called _tests _ in here, like that. And then in here, we can have a list of all of our movie or test files that we want. So in this one now, because we're doing it for movie details, we can just do a test file for that. So it's simply just movie details dot test dot tsx, like so. So now what I want to do as well actually is just open another terminal and do npm run dev, just run everything so we can actually see what we're going to be testing this time. So in our movie details component, let me just click through to here. There's a few things we want to test. This is a kind of review form, but what I want to do is I want to test that one later on. In this component, in this page, we have a few things going on. So first of all, we're checking that actually the relevant information is being rendered, but we also have some user interaction now. So we have a form. So this is going to type something in, and then when we press submit, then we want to test that this grade is also being shown on the screen as well. So that is what we will be doing now. So let's go ahead and create our describe block. So what we can simply do is we can just copy everything in here and then go back in here, close everything else out, and then paste this in. We know that we now need to import the or render out the movie details. So this will be movie details, like so. Now there's two tests we want to test for. First one is going to be, of course, the rendering of what displays correctly in the component. And then the second part is going to be the user interaction. So first part is going to be the movie details page. And now what we need to do is we need to render out the movie details. So to render out the movie details, we want to check that this receives any props, which it doesn't. So that makes our rendering process easy. So all we do here is movie details. That gets imported in from the relevant page. We already have render and screen imported, so that's fine. What we can do now is simply just do screen.debug once again if you're unsure on what is getting rendered. So again, it will always be the same because in our page, if I save this, in our page, we are always getting this as the movie data. Now, when it's dynamic, you would pass in the different props. You would create mocks of what you want to use. So first thing I want to do is I want to do npm test in here. So now we should have two tests. Again, you can see two tests are passing because this one here, doesn't have any expectations. So that's why it's passing. So let's just do the scrolling up on here. You can see it says the component is rendering. It's got inception in there, so we can comment this one out. It also has 4.8 out of 5 in here. So these tests should actually pass. So let me just save that. Scroll down, you can see 2 tests are passing. So that is the first section complete. What we want to do is also check that it displays the movie title and the rating. So you can keep that title in here or you can change it. It's up to you, but I think that works fine as well. And what I also can do is if I want to add another assertion of the Dark Knight or something like this will then fail because it's saying one field. You can scroll up and it says here testing library unable to find the element with the text the Dark Knight. This could be because the text is broken up into multiple elements. In this case, you can provide a function with a text matcher and so on. So first of all, we've looked at the obviously all the passing tests, but now what we want to look at is a failing test. So to fix this, what we can do is we can say expect Dark Knight to not be in the document. So that's just an extra dot not before here. And now if we do save, you can see still it's failing. Why is it failing? Because it can't actually find it. So now that we can tell this, it's saying that actually our unit test is working and inception is showing. So let's just delete that. What I also want to show you is some extra matches that we can use instead of obviously get by text and so on. In our page, we can go to here where the H1 is and we can add a data ID or a test ID. And if we go into our docs, actually, what we can do is in the matches in React testing library, because that's what we're using, you can scroll down to the example. And now you can see there's a few matches in here. So it says render our component. Then we have the act. So this is what we will be doing anyway, but you can add in a user role. So screen dot get by role, get by text, get by test ID, and so on. So this role in this scenario is heading. So we can add in a heading for our matcher. So let's just go ahead and copy this test here. And what we want essentially is this to have text content of inception. So let me just copy this and paste that in here and then save that. Now the test will fail because it's saying that it can't find the text matcher. So let's just find the text matcher for, so here it says if this is intentional you can use all by and so on, but we want to ignore that. It says found multiple elements with the role heading, so that's fine. Because there's multiple elements with the role heading, you can see here H1 and the H2 of reviews. What we can do is we can find the first one. So because it's in order, we can do get all by role like that. And then because it's an array, we can start off with the first index like so. So now let me save this. And now you can see the test has passed. Again, we can do the same thing again, but this time it will be the first one, meaning the second heading, and this one will be reviews like so. And then you can chain it on further and add further items in. You can see here now what's happening is Copilot suggesting quite a lot of things in here. You can see that we have amazing movie to be in the document, mind blowing to be in the document. If I scroll up, it's saying text box to have attribute in here, and you can see it's saying write our review, and it actually received write your review. So let me just change this and now save this, and you can see this has passed. So you can chain on further elements, and this is a few examples of how you would test something out. And you can see here screen.get by role of button with the name of submit to be in the document. You can also have attribute in there as well. And there's many examples. So you can look at the React testing library documentation on how many matches you can use, how many assertions you can use, and so on. So let me just save everything. We've done the first part, which is correct. Now what we want to do is create our second unit test. So this unit test is going to basically test that it allows the user to submit a new review. So actually what we can do is just do what Copilot suggests. So let me just save this. This is of course failing because we've not actually looked at what's happening. So allows users to submit a new review. So the first thing is we render our movie details, which is the component. That's fine. This is where we can get our review input like so. So in this scenario is going to be the text box. So get by role text box in here. So we can essentially do this, copy this part, which we have as the review input. The submit button we also have as the assertion up top over here as well. So we can create our constants like so. There's a little slight mistake, so I just want to bring in what we have. So it's not the text box we need, it's the placeholder text where it says write your review. So let me just go in our app and refresh this page. And you can see this bit here where it says write your review. This is what we want to select. And then we want to start typing something in. Once we type something in, then we press submit. Then what happens is we want to check that it's showing onto the page. So that's the steps we need to test. So let's go ahead and do that. So what we can do is add some comments in of get the review import and submit button in here. Then what we want to do is simulate a user typing the review like that. So you can do focus or whatever, but what I want to do is I want to do something called fire event. So let me type in fire event like so. And then this has dot change, which means that we can change something within the fire event. So this is like the event target value. And you can see Copilot suggesting all of this for me. And you can see here, if I do the change one, so let me just import fire event from testing library. If I hover over change, you can see the first argument is an element, and then the second argument is going to be the options in here, which is basically an object. So the object has the target of great movie or whatever it is, and I'm just going to put great movie from Imran in there just to make it unique. Then I've typed that in, so that's the first part done. Now I want to click the submit button. So let me just add the comment of simulate form submission like that, and you can basically do fire event dot click of submit button like this. So that's the first part done, and then we want to expect that this text over here is rendered. So let me just put in the wrong text in for now, and let me just save this. And now you can see if we scroll down, it says great movie by Imran there, but it doesn't actually say the actual issue that I'm having. So it says unable to find elements with the text great movie. This could be because of example over here, but the reason why is because we've actually got the debugger on as well. It says great movie by Imran in here or from Imran. So let me just actually copy this, and what I want to do is at the top I can do a const of expect review like that. And instead of this over here and typing it out here, what we can do now is paste this in and save. And now it's saying there's an issue. So let me just go ahead and check what the issue is. So if we scroll down, it's saying great movie from Imran, like so. And it's being typed out twice because in our component, if I was to actually do this twice, so let's do great review from Imran. So this is where we use our unit test to be able to find issues in our components. So great review from Imran, press submit, and now you can see it's not clearing in the text box. So that's why it's failing. So again, writing unit tests is helpful for certain scenarios like this. So now we've got two elements in here. So what essentially should happen is when we submit, then the actual form should clear. In this scenario, when we're rendering it, we've got it twice. You can see 1, 2. So that would trigger us to make a change in our form itself. And in the review form component, on submit. So let me just do on submit in here. That does everything. And we on change set review to e.target.value. We pass in the review up here, but we should clear it. So again, this would then need a refactor on how we would work. I'll put this in purposely so that we can find the error, fix the error on our component, and then it should work. So now what we can do in this scenario, because the test is failing, is we want to get by the li. So essentially at the top, what we can do is say const list item, something like this. So now that I know that this review should be a list item, so let me just add a comment in here. Check that if the new review is displayed as a list item, like so. And then what we can do now is we can say screen.getByText and then expected review as the constant. So let me just extract this const new review like that. So now we've got our new review. I expect new review not to be in the document, but to be an li. So this new review will be an li like that. So let me save this. And this is failing, so we forgot to add in the tag name. So now let me save that. So now this is showing an error. So there's another check we need to do. So this is quite similar to JavaScript, but what essentially we want to do is we want to find all of them, but then filter it out by using something like a sum. And that way we want to check the tag name. So what we can do now is we can do check if this is a list item. So const is list item. And you can do something like new review dot sum for each item. The item dot tag name is li like that. And then what we can do here, because there's two of them, is essentially do to be something like truthy. So let's do this as well, which is a new matcher. So now let me save that. And now you can see this has passed because what essentially has happened is we found an issue in our code. We've not actually fixed the issue, but we found a way around with our unit test. Again, I would recommend refactoring your code because that's what Jest enables you to do, and it finds out the errors that you have. And then you can have something like this in here. So essentially, these are going to be uploaded on the GitHub repository, but this is the example of how unit test files will look, especially when you have components. So this one is also complete now. Right, so now that we've created our unit test, what I want to do next is look at edge cases and how essentially I would submit something. If I was to submit it, then I would get an error or something is incorrect with what we're rendering on our component, and we will look at that next. Right, so in the previous video, we encountered an error which was essentially when we added a movie review in here like this, what happened was it was kind of submitting. So let me just add in great movie. It was submitting correctly, but when we was finding the expectation, it was saying there was more than one. So what was happening was it was adding it here, but then also not clearing it in here. So we had to find a workaround for this. But essentially what that highlighted was the fact that when we create unit tests properly and correctly, then it finds where the issues are in our code base. So what we want to do is first of all fix that. So we will do that one and also handle other edge cases. So if I was to kind of submit and it was empty, then something should happen to stop this from happening. So if I submit now, you can see empty an empty space is being submitted. So what we want to do is we want to test for edge cases like this in our unit tests. So what we are going to do is fix all of them. So let's go ahead and get started. So in our movie details component or page in here, essentially we have reviews, which is fine, which that works correctly. But in our review form, so we're passing in the reviews, which is correct. That's fine. But we want to clear the state when we submit. So when we submit the on click in here, I'm going to now create a function called handle submit. And essentially this function is going to do all of the logic that we need. So let's scroll up to the top, and actually let me just delete this and let me just bring in my handle submit function. And now what I want to do is it's saying here that we want to trim. So let's trim, that's fine. Then on submit, we want to submit what we have submitted after it's trimmed, so i.e. removing the white space, and then we want to clear the text area. So now what will happen is we need to create the corresponding unit test for this. So let me just bring that in. And essentially it's just another if block. It does not add any empty values or for any reviews. We get the initial reviews, we get the length, which whatever that is, and then we have the submit button. We fire the submit button, so we just want to click that submit button works. Then what we do is we get the updated reviews, which essentially should be the same. This test is now passing. It's saying 4 in here, and so on. So what we can also do is, instead of that, it should say equal, and I believe this will pass as well. You can see here now is to equal as well. So it's showing you different assertions of how we can work with unit tests. So let me just save that. And then again, the updated reviews checks the length, initial reviews checks the length as well. So that is how we would handle our edge cases in our code. So now if I were to refresh, let me submit something, and you can see something is it's not submitting anymore. I'm clicking the button. So again, you could add something into your UI that says when we click an empty one, then it shows a red outline on our box. Again, you could do a unit test for this to say that this happens as well. And then the other thing was great movie. This was rendering twice because it wasn't clearing when we submitted. So if I press submit now, it's cleared, and then also the movie has, or the review has been added on as well. So that is how you would handle edge cases. And again, you can see here we've got 2 test suites in 2 files and 4 tests. So we have 3 unit tests in 1 file, which is this one. It covers most of the scenarios. There will be more, but essentially, this is how you would test them. So now what we're going to be doing next is testing utility functions. So functions that we've created that are unique and then that get used across the application. So if you look below in here, I have a utils folder. Now in the utils folder, I have helpers, and essentially I can have a list of all of the helpers that I want. But in this example here, we're going to be testing this get top movies function, and we will be doing that next. Right, so to test a utility function or any function in particular, it's quite simple. This function here takes in an input and then essentially does some filtering and has an output. So it's as simple as render this function, pass in different types of inputs, and then show the relevant output, i.e., in this example here, we're filtering some movies, so we're passing in an array of movies. It should filter out and then spit out, for example, if 2 or 3 of the movies were greater than 4.5, then it would show that as the output. So that's what we want to do. So in utils, we can do a new file in here. So we can do helper.test.ts in here. So let's actually do that. Or you can do it in the test folder at the top as well. It's up to you. I'm just showing you different ways of doing the unit test. So helpers.test.ts, because there's no JSX in this one. Then what we want to do is we want to essentially create our describe block. So let's just do describe, and then again pass in what we need to do in here. So let's just close this down for now. And now we want to create our it block within the describe block. And let's just actually just remove all of this. And now let me save that. Now what happens is with actual functions, we don't need to render anything because it's just a function we're testing. So now instead of this, the first thing we want to test is the describe block. So let me just quickly change this. So this describe block can be helper functions or whatever it is, but in this scenario, it's just going to be get the top movies. So let's copy this, and we can also import it in as well. So let me just render this and import from helpers. And basically, we just want to pass in a few different arguments or pass in an array of movies in here. So let's just say Inception, Dark Knight, Interstellar, like that. Or what we can do is quite simple, is we have the array that we've created. So let me just delete this. So the array that we've created is in movie data here. So we can just literally copy this one and go in here and paste this in and import it in as well. So let me save that. This will pass. We're passing in the movies and so on. That should work. Or what we can do is, instead of that, we can just basically create an array of different types of movies, delete this one, and then this is failing because of the types. It's expecting the image URL as well. So let's go ahead and add some image URLs. So you can see now that this function takes in 3 arguments. Well, 1 argument, which is an array of objects, like so. We're passing it in. We're doing all of that, which is fine. but we know that the function only returns items greater than 4.5. So we've got one there, we've got two, and then the last one is 3.2. So again, they won't work. So what we can actually do is move this movies up to the top. So let's take that up. Now that's working. That movies here can be reused. So you can have something like a mocks file or something like that. But again, we can amend this original movies with the spread operator and make some changes and so on. So this is all fine. We're rendering it, everything's working. But what we want to do is in our test over here, we want to check that it returns only the movies that are greater than 4.5. And then what I want to do is I want to say const top movies like so. So we've got the assertion in here. Let me delete this one. And then we can basically, it does this for us. So it's saying that this should equal this. And it also should say expect top movies.length to be 2 instead of 4. So let me save that, and you can see all the unit tests have passed. So what's happened is, so we're taking out all the movies in the array at the top, which is all movies, and then let's just change that name. Then what we're doing is we're getting the top movies from all movies, which is essentially Inception and The Dark Knight from there, and then it also has a length of 2. So let me see if I change this, what happens. So again, you should do this as well. So this should now fail, and if you scroll up, what Jest does is it gives you the rating that it is receiving. So you can see here the plus is the correct one, and this is what we type, which is the wrong one. So let's just Command Z back and save. And now you can see that the tests are now passing. So now that's the positive, but what about the negative? We want to create a new unit test, which essentially does returns an empty array when no movie has a rating above 4.5. So let me do that. And then movie A, which again we need an image URL for, and then also the second one, which again we need an image URL for as well. So now let's save that, and you can see the test pass because it's saying that the array was empty. So because it's empty, it should pass. So let me just quickly change this to 4.5 and save. So now you can see movie A over here, because it's 4.5 and above, it should be included in this equal over here. So let me just change it back. And now you can see the tests are now passing. So that is as simple as it gets for creating the functions. And one final one as an edge case is a final unit test of returns an empty array when given an empty list. So let me save that. And again, you can see that this has also passed because when you pass in an empty array into movies, then there's nothing to filter. So therefore, it should equal an empty array. So we've essentially tested how we would test all utility functions. You would do the same with any other arguments if there were more than one argument in the function itself, and essentially that's how you do your unit tests as well. So what we're going to be looking at next is we're going to be looking at how to test global context. So we're going to be using useContext from React. So we will just quickly bring in a component that has a global state, and then therefore when we make changes to the global state, we want to be able to test that as well. So that's what we will be doing next. Right, so let's say for example we have a global context with use context in our application. Then what we want to do is we want to check if the global state is changing. So what I want to do is create a new folder. So let's create a folder called context at the global level, like so. And in here, I'm just going to create a file called review context.tsx. And then let me just simply create this global context. Let me scroll down. We'll have a look at what's going on. So let me just export these into our types file, which we have over here. Export and then paste in our types. We don't need to worry about the types for now, but actually we can do so. Essentially, the review context type is contains our reviews, which is basically a review of ID, movie ID, and text. Then we have the action that we dispatch, which adds the review. And then we also have the clear review. So the payload of the add review is going to be containing the movie ID and the text as well. So that's the first part. Let's just import in the relevant types like so. We have our higher order component, which is our review context provider, like so. We have our actions in here, so add review and so on. You can see here function to add review and function to clear reviews. So think about when we're doing our unit test in the last video, what we did was we created tests for our utility function. So you could do the same for these ones. And then we also have our global state as well, which essentially is empty. But when we dispatch the action of add review, then it adds the review. And also when we clear reviews, it clears reviews. So essentially we will add unit tests for this. And then the review use review context is a hook as well. So we can essentially test this hook also. So that's the first part. We've created our global context. So now what I want to do is create the unit test for this. And what we can do is in our test folder over here is we can create a new file. So this file is going to be called useReviewContext.test.tsx. So let me just paste that in. There's a few things that happen with this one. So we have the describe block as normal, and then we basically pass in our it blocks as well. But for now, this one is going to be called use review context as our describe block. Let's save that. And then in here, we want to add our initial setup. So what happens initially, so in our review context, you can see our provider is basically empty. You can see here, this is an empty array. So that's how it should be at the start. So essentially, that's what we want to create the unit test for. So I'll just quickly bring that in. Let me save that. And there's a few things we need to import. So it initially has an empty review list. So let me import render hook from testing library React. Let me import our use review context that we just created. And also we need to import the review provider that we have. Now, what we are doing is we're rendering our hook. So when we create a custom hook or any hook, then we have access to something called render hook in testing library React. We are destructuring the result from the render hook. So if we hover over it, this is basically the first argument is a callback. So we render something, and then the second argument is an object. So that contains the wrapper of the review provider, so the higher order component. So now we expect result.current.reviews. So this is our reviews list to equal, and then it should be an empty array. So if you look here, this is an empty array. So let's save that. And now you can see the tests are all passing. We have 8 in total. So that's the first one, how you would essentially A, how to render a hook, and B, how to essentially check our global state and see if everything works correctly. So now that's the first test complete. The second one is we want to test the add review functionality and also the clear reviews functionality. So let's go ahead and bring in the test for the add review functionality and run through that. So essentially, if you just bring in the code, there's a few slight changes. So again, what we want to do is add in the hook that we're rendering. In our case, it's the review context, and then the provider that wraps around it. Then we destructure the result. So actually, let's add the comment in here of get the result. This gets the context. So let's just get that one. And then we'll also add in the same comment for the above as well. Then we want to basically do something called act. So if you import this in from testing library React, act is basically do some action that we need to do. And then essentially it will say result.current.add review. And it takes in obviously the 2 arguments. So add review, if we go into here, it takes in a movie ID and some text as well. Then it updates the reviews of the initial global state from empty to whatever the ID is, and then adds in the movie ID as well, and also the text that we pass in. So first thing is it does that, and then we get the length. It should be 1. That's fine. And also we've passed in 1 as the movie ID, which it is here. And then we've also passed in the text as great movie. So we can also do something like const expected review like this equal to And let me just fix this. And then all you do is basically pass in this object. So Command X, paste that in, expected review to equal here. So just clean it up a little bit. And then now you can see if you scroll up, the tests are now passing. So that is what's happening. It's basically guess the context. This is how to add the review, expected review, and then this checks the review was added correctly, like so. So that is as simple as it is. The only difference being is how we kind of get the expectations and also how we render out the context with obviously render hook. So that's how it works. And then just to finally do the last one, which is clear the review. So in this scenario, we need to add a review first or add it into the base context first and then essentially clear it out. So again, add in our comment, this gets the context. Then we want to add the review. Then we want to clear the review. So again, add the comment in here. This clears the review. You can see here. So two functions are being called. First one, we add the review, then we clear the review, then the result should be empty. So that's it, really. I think that is as simple as it gets for how to add unit testing for your context, your global context. Again, if you're using Redux, it's the similar kind of pattern where you would have your render hook method in here, and that's what you would use, and then essentially do the same functionality as well. So as always, what we should do is add edge cases in. So finally, let's do an edge case. So basically, this will throw an error if used outside the review provider. So essentially, in the review context now, what we are doing is we're not passing in the wrapper like you see here with the review provider. So now Copilot's helped me a little bit there. So now what we are doing is we expect and then we're rendering the hook of use review context, and then this will be thrown in here, which is use review context must be used within a review provider. If we look and find this, so let me just copy this text in our code over here. You can see if there's no context, then the error is thrown. So now what we're going to be doing is looking at snapshot testing, and we will do that next. Right, so this is probably the most overused unit test going, which is a snapshot test. Essentially, it's self-explanatory. What it does is it tests for a snapshot of your code at a certain point in time. So what we want to do is look at that, but essentially it's a saved version of your component full UI. And then if you make changes, for example, then you should kind of update it. So it will fail if obviously the snapshots haven't been updated and so on. So that's what we will be looking at and how we would create unit tests for it. So let's go ahead and do that. So first of all, I've got our MovieCard component. So let me just go in app components, MovieCard, and we have the index.test that we created earlier on. That's fine. What I also want to do is do another one, which is a snapshot. So essentially it renders correctly via the snapshot or something like this. So that's fine. We want to essentially render the movie card itself. So I'm going to say the title is going to be snapshot and the rating is going to be 5, just to differentiate it a little bit. And then the image is snapshot.jpg, something like that. And now it's simple as we want to expect. We can do screen.get by text and so on to be there. But what we want to do is we can give this a const of movie card component is equal to render, and then we essentially do expect movie card to match snapshot like that. So now what this will do, it says here, it says one snapshot written. You go into here, you can see a snapshot has been created, and it's got its index.test.tsx.snap. And this is basically rendering what we have just created. So we passed in the component 5 out of 5 and so on. And then what has happened is it's rendered that snapshot for us. So what happens now if I was to change this to 4, and this is going to be new snapshot as the title. So now let me save this, and you can see something has happened. So it says here, snapshot name movie card renders correctly via snapshot 1. So when we created our first snapshot, it was fine because there was no previous snapshot to compare it against. But now what's happened is it's saying that actually there's a difference in what we are creating in here. So there's a few changes that you can make. So you can have Jest update snapshot, which is in our package JSON. So let's create that, which is essentially the test colon update like that, which essentially does update snapshot. You can do that and run that command. That will fix and update all of our changes. Or you can press U in here. So press W to show more. And then it says here, press U to update failing snapshot. So let's actually press U. And now you can see it says one updated, one total. So that's fine. That works. So now, if you hover over this now and actually close this down, let's reopen the snapshot. You can see everything works fine now. So I want to first of all test that this now works. So let me just quickly Command Shift P and actually Command Shift P and restart our TypeScript server. So it's saying something wrong. Let me see why. It's the difference in here. So now we want to say second snapshot like that. And then now the movie rating is going to be 3. Now let's save. This will fail once again. But what I want to do is I want to do npm test update, which is the command we created earlier on. Again, let's close everything down. So close all, and then let's run this command. And all of these tests now should pass. You can see here test update doesn't work. So let's just check we're using the right command first of all. That's correct. So it should be npm run test update. This will do Jest update snapshot. It then updates the snapshot, and then you can see here now your snapshot has been updated in here. So if we go in index.test.tsx, what it's now saying is there's an error in here. Let's just do a quick fix test failure, use Copilot. It's just as simple as it gets. And then you can see investing in the code is doing your snapshot, whatever it is doing in here. So although the snap is actually updating, the unit test needs to catch up. So what we need to do now is we've done that update and so on. Let's close this down. And again, MovieCard component, because we've kind of changed this a few times, it's kind of bugging out. So it says here 4.3 out of 5. So you can see what's essentially has happened is the MovieCard component has kind of overwritten a few times in here. So to stop this from happening, what we can do is instead of this, we can say delete this and destructure something called as fragment, and then we would basically do expect as fragment, which is a assertion, is a function like that to match snapshot. And let's save that. Again, this has failed quite a lot, and actually this is where something called clear mock should work. So before each test, so we have something called before each, and in here we have something called jest.clear all mocks. So basically what happens is each time we do a test, we should do clear all mocks like so. So actually, there's quite a lot happening under the hood for this one. So essentially, it wraps the DOM into a body tag. So that's what we did when we did the const. But now we're using as fragment. That's probably the cleaner practice. So you can read up on as fragment in the docs, or if you command and click through in here, you can see what a document fragment is as well in the global d.ts file. So now all we want to do is run our update snapshot again. So let's just do that. This will update our snapshot for us. And then all we need to do now is basically restart the TypeScript server. And now once we've run that test again, you can see now that the file is working correctly. And then also the snapshot has also updated. So it should say 3 out of 5, which we have passed in 3 in here as well. So that's how you do your snapshot testing. So what I want to do next is look at some tips and tricks on how to optimize your tests with Jest. And we will do that next. Right, so let's go ahead and add some tips and tricks in on optimizing your Jest unit test. So first one I want to do is something where we mock expensive dependencies, especially when we're using something like fetch. So in our test folder in here, I'm going to create a new test file. This one is going to be called fetch.ts, like so. And essentially we want to kind of mock an expensive call like a fetch instead of doing it in every single file. I know we haven't touched how to do API testing, but I'll do that in a separate video because we haven't used a specific API for this video. This is just to cover most of the basics. So essentially what we would do is something called global.fetch. And this is how we would kind of do everything in our unit test as well when we want to fetch something or test something out. So essentially, this is what you would do, which is basically global.fetch equals jest.fn, which is a function. We would resolve the promise or reject as well. So promise.reject would reject the API call on the circumstance where we want to hit a catch block, for example. This is just basically creating a reusable fetch for us. Now, instead of results for this scenario in our movie data, what we can do here instead is pass in our movies that we have already defined like that. So now when we are, for example, simulating a fetch, then we can use our movie data as well. So this is like a baseline of when we want to create some sort of global fetch on our application. And then what you can do if you want this to fetch on all of our files. So let's just say, for example, I wanted to fetch movies on every single unit test, then essentially you can just copy all of this and then add it to the Jest setup over here, and you can add it in here like so. So it's as simple as that. We don't need this as jest.mock. Essentially, what we are doing here is we are making it globally available, so then all of the movies are being fetched. So let me save that, and then let's do npm test. This will test everything works. This is running everything for us. And then as a bonus, what we can also do is before each, we could do global.fetch and then do .mock clear like that. And then this will basically reset the function before the tests. So in between each test, you can kind of reset the fetch as well that way. So these are some handy tips as well when you're kind of reusing the movies and so on. If this doesn't make sense to you, that's fine. What essentially I'm going to be doing is creating a separate video just for APIs on its own and how to work with them and Jest as well. So we will be doing that in a few weeks' time. But that's a tip that you could use where you can add everything into your Jest setup as well. Another thing is before each, we can do that. And also, what we should do is what we did in a file here, which was just clear all mocks. Instead of adding it to every single file in here, what you can also do is add that in here as well. So every time we do a unit test, it clears all the mocks out as well. So that is another tip. Another tip is in here, if we was to right click and run test or debug test, we can do that as well. So let's first of all run test. This opens up the test results tab in here. You can see our test that we are running, which is the use review context. In here, it's ran that test file over here, and it said one passed, which is obviously the one describe block, and then the four tests, which are the 4 8 blocks as well in here. And again, you can run each test selectively as well. The extension I've got for this is actually the Wallaby.js, which I have, and also this one, which is the test runner. So I believe it's the Jest test one. So let me go in here. You can see this one is the one I am using, which helps with a lot of your tests as well. So you can scroll down, read more about it and so on. But essentially, it allows you to have that click what I've been doing just to run individual tests as well. So let's say I wanted to run out this test here, which is the snapshot. It's run that out for me. You can see here it skipped the other one as well. So that's another handy tip to have. The other tip is the right click. And if you don't have that extension, then you can just do copy relative path. In the terminal, do npm run test, paste in the path like so, and then this will run the specific test for that one file that you want in here. So sometimes you will have many different files available to you and you just want to test the one in there if you didn't have access to the handy extensions that we have. So that's most of the tips I have for you. Again, if you run the test, so if you do npm test, we're running that, that's fine. What we want to do is npm test, and then in here we have these options in here, and there's other extra options that you can add into your package JSON as well, such as coverage. So in here we can do dash dash coverage. Now if I was to save this, run the test again, so let me close this down, npm run test, it runs the test with the coverage. Then you get this table in here of all of the files in your code base. You can see here that we have statements of all files. You can see moviedata.ts isn't covered, so we can look at that and say actually we need to update the coverage on this one, We have the branch, the functions and lines. We can see every file is covered other than the movie data. Now, with this data, what we should do is we should set minimum coverage on our code base in general. So what we can do is in our setup, so in our Jest config, and what we did was we've added a few extra config items in here. But what we can do is we can do something called collect coverage. And you can see there's quite a lot going on in here, and it shows you all of the available items that we can have. So collect coverage as true, and then we can basically do collect coverage from, and then we specify the files that we want. But in our scenario, what I want to do is coverage threshold, and then in here is branches, functions, line, statement, and essentially it should be a minimum of 80 always. So if it was less than that, then meaning the overall coverage should be 80, then we can actually fix that. So again, these are all handy tools that you can use for your Jest conf. And again, let's try and get this back to 100. So let's go into moviedata.ts. So that's in utils. And essentially, I want to create a unit test for this, which is quite simple. And I do encourage creating unit tests for objects as well. So let's create the test for this, which is moviedata.ts. And actually, it's moviedata.test.ts, like so. And then essentially, what we do in here is we just want to make sure that, first of all, the movie data is correct. So I'll bring in the import and explain to you what's going on. So first of all, we should have movie data that should be defined. Movies.length should be 3 because in our movie data, we only have 3 objects. So again, when we extend this, then we update the unit test. The should have correct structure for each movie. So movies dot for each, and then for each movie, it should have a property of. So these are the keys, which is title, rating, and image URL. Again, type of, which is checking the types, which is another handy thing to have. And then it should have a valid rating for each movie. So basically, it should be between 0 and 5. So again, we're adding in our unit test. If we scroll up now, you can see our movie data has changed from 50 to 100, and that is another success that we have as well. So hopefully you learned a lot in this crash course of how to implement Jest in your code base. All of these tools are handy, especially when you have a production code base and you're working in a production environment, because unit tests are important to find bugs and fix them. I've shown you how to do all of that in this video and this crash course. We'll be looking at doing a video around APIs because that again requires a base knowledge, which hopefully you have learned in this video. And I'm going to be looking at doing that one shortly. But there are other videos on my channel to take a look at. So take a look at them. What I would also ask for is if you have any tips as well on Jest that you can help other people with, then also add them into the comments. But again, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.